I was born in Cottonwood, Arizona. My mother has told me all sorts of stories about when I was born. She told me that it was in the middle of the night, that she felt it was time, and she called up her parents that lived there nearby, and they came and got the other 5 kids, and they took them away, and I was born at home, a home birth. My mom had midwives that came over and helped her with the birth, and everybody was so excited that Caitlin was going to be born. But to everyone's surprise, I was a bouncing little boy. My mom says that first time she held me that I was a little bit different than any of her other children, because when I looked up, my eyes were wide open, and they stayed wide open for several days. And she said that she felt that I was seeing a lot more than any of the rest of us were, and that I was her guardian angel during that time. So as I grew up, I was the 7th of 9 children, so there was always plenty of roughhousing and craziness that happened in my house growing up. And one of the times that I remember quite well, I was 5 or 6, kindergarten age, and we had this great big bouncing ball that you'd sit on, and it had a handle, and you'd bounce up and down, and we'd play with that. And my older brother had been playing with this, and he had gone to the bathroom or something, and as the mischievous child that I am, as soon as he had left, I hopped on the ball and was bouncing around on it. And when he came back, I saw him, and he started chasing me. And so, of course, I squealed and ran away as fast as I could. But as I was running around the kitchen and through the front room, my brother had caught up with me. And as we were running at full speed, he stepped on the back of my heel. And in doing this, he caused a double spiral fracture up my tibia. And so there I am, laying on the ground and screaming my full head off, right? And he's giving, the classic older brother speech, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, don't tell Mom. And eventually Mom and Dad did come in and to investigate what was going on. And they thought, it's bruised, he's hurt. And so they sent me to bed, and they put away and put me up for the night, and I remember it hurt so bad. And eventually in the morning, they realized, okay, there's something a little bit more going on here. And so we went to the doctor, and of course, the doctor says, yeah, it's definitely broken. And so I spent several months in kindergarten in a wheelchair, wearing a big purple cast. I remember going out to recess when I was in kindergarten and sitting out on the playground in my wheelchair and just watching everyone else play. And it wasn't fun until one day I found out that there was a wheelchair ramp that went up this steep slope to the bus ramp. And I realized that if I took the wheelchair up to the top of that bus ramp and then turned off the brakes and just let go, I could go really fast down this wheelchair ramp. And so what ended up happening is I started taking my fellow kids in kindergarten down, and they'd sit on the wheelchair with me, and we'd go up to the top of the bus ramp. I'd roll all the way up, and then they'd sit on the wheelchair with me, and then we'd go zipping down the bus ramp as fast as we could. Dad got offered a new job. We've been in Page for 7 years now, and it has been an interesting place to live. Lots of interesting things. It was mainly owned by the Navajos, and so it made for an interesting community with the reservation right there and the dichotomy of the mixing of cultures. But Dad got offered a new job. He worked for the church, and he got offered a new job as a facilities manager in Cedar City, Utah. And so they began looking for houses, and they finally found one in Parowan, a 15-minute drive from Cedar, and so they put us all in the Suburban, and they drove us up to Parowan, and we saw the house, and we thought it was pretty cool. It was a good place to be, and so we put a bid on it, and we won. We moved to Parowan that December, and I remember getting there, and it was a little bit weird, starting elementary school in a new place, and coming from a town of several thousand to a town of 1,000 or a few hundred maybe. It was a very different atmosphere. Everybody in town was members of the church, and everybody had their pioneer story because it was a small pioneer town. But growing up in Parowan was an adventure. There was never much that a little boy could want for, because there was always something to do. There was always some adventure to get into, some mud puddle to cause trouble in, or always something to get involved in a small town, because everybody needed to come together and create the incredible things that we had. Growing up on a mini farm is often what we called it. When we moved to Parowan, my dad said, it's time that we taught you kids how I grew up. And so the first thing that we did when we got to Parowan is there was this old chicken coop in the back. And so we went back and we boarded up some of the holes, and we oiled the old barn wood and got it looking really good. And then we ordered 40 chicks. We had Buff Orpington's chickens and a few others, and we had just all of these little chicks running around, and we had the warming light and everything, and we watched these chickens growing up, and we named them and had lots of fun with these chickens. And we found that it was kind of hard as they were growing up to make sure that you had the right one. So we found that if you took colored zip ties and you strapped one around each of their legs and then snipped off everything but just that little zip tie, like they do in the wild to mark wild animals that they're tracking, that we could keep track of which chicken was which. And so we grew up with these friends, the chickens, and these chickens were a little bit different than other chickens. They weren't as flighty because we spent so much time with them. We'd come out every afternoon and we'd sit down in this old crummy lawn chair that we'd put out in the chicken area, and you'd sit down and we had a bucket full of oats, and you sit down and you'd had chickens crawl up your legs, you had them fly up onto your shoulders, and so you had 5 or 6 chickens sitting there right in your lap and your shoulders, and you held grain in your hand, and they'd peck the grain right out of your hand, and it was always an adventure. And then on top of that, my dad, he wanted to continue with that feel. And so we took half of the lot as well, and we created a huge garden. And so I remember growing up having fresh garden produce, cucumbers, tomatoes, asparagus, crookneck squash, zucchini, corn, all of the veggies that you could think of to feed a family. But along with that, I also remember weeding. Every morning of the summer, we'd get up, we'd send Dad to work, and then it was out to the garden before it got too hot, and we'd weed for 2 or 3 hours, and there was always the complaining and moaning, but it eventually got done, and it was a good lesson in hard work and see some of the fruits of your labors. My dad is a wonderful person, and we love him a lot, but he has one major weakness, and that is for animals. He would go to Walmart, and there'd be a cute little girl that had a litter of kittens or of puppies or you name it, and my dad would just melt inside, and he would come home with another small little critter that we would then take care of. I remember at one time having like 10 dogs, that we were taking care of and playing with, and then that was not to include the two barnyard cats that we had and the ducks, and we found a goose once that was injured on the side of the road that my dad took and nursed back to health. There was a skunk at one point in time. And just we had wonderful adventures playing with these different animals, and it helped us grow a wonderful respect for wildlife and for these creatures. We learned how to care for something else. I remember growing up, and there was always a litter of puppies on the way. One of the neighborhood dogs had got our dog pregnant, and we'd have a big litter of puppies, and then we'd share them with everybody else in the neighborhood. The Ruesch family had supplied half the town with dogs. But one specific animal that I thought was just a little bit different. My dad was at work one day, and he works for the church. He was sitting in the church parking lot getting ready to come home when he looked out and he saw this mass in the middle of the parking lot, and he thought, that's weird. And so he decided to go and check it out, and he got over there, and sitting in the middle of this rain puddle was a great big black crow. And this crow looked like it had probably been hit by a car or something, and it was really roughed up. It had missing feathers and scuffed up. And so my dad, being the guy that he is, went to his car and pulled a towel out of the trunk, and he wrapped up this crow, and he brought it home. And so there we are sitting at home, and we're putting bandages, Neosporin, and these salves we'd concocted to help this crow heal. And it started out in an old bird cage that we had as we nursed it back to health, and it slowly warmed up to us a little bit. And then after it got a little bit better, we'd take the crow and we'd put it on our arm, and we'd walk it out, and we'd put it out in one of the apple trees. And it would sit out in the apple tree all day long, just looking around, observing the entire yard, and just remain quiet there. And it was still healing. We thought it had a broken wing, and it just sat there. And then when it came to nighttime, we'd come back out, and the bird would hop up onto our arm, and we'd take it back in and put it on the perch inside the house to make sure that it wasn't in danger of predators during the night. And eventually, this crow, as it healed, it started exploring the yard a little bit. Started off exploring some of the different branches in this apple tree. Then eventually, it hopped down, and it would hop across the lawn. And eventually, it wandered its way into the dog pen. And when we saw it out there, we thought, oh no, this crow's dead. The dogs are going to tear it apart, and it's going to be over. But then we realized that the dogs were avoiding this crow. They're scared of this crow. And we had dogs ranging from little dachshunds and chihuahuas to we had a Newfoundland Saint Dane mix, and huge animal. But this crow was king of the pen, and these dogs would avoid it. And Crow thought that this was the best thing ever, being the alpha in this pack of dogs, and so he started just living out there with the dogs. He refused to come in eventually, and we'd bring out food to the dogs and fill up their food dishes, and the crow would come up right with the rest of them, and he'd start eating the dog food with the dogs, and finally realized that this crow believes that he's a dog, and so he was redubbed Krog, and he's lived ever since then in the dog pen. He never did start to fly again, but he just hops around and he patrols the entire yard, and he's just our little guard crow that keeps all of the nasty things away, and he shows that he's the alpha dog in the pack. I remember I was about 10, 11, and I was always a little bit of a entrepreneur and always scheming ways to get more money and to save it. And one day I decided I needed to go and get myself a job. And so I was talking to a neighborhood a friend, one of our neighbors, and they said, we'd be happy to hire you on. They delivered papers every morning, and we need a paper boy. And so, I thought, a young lad and having a paper route, how awesome is that? Small town paper route. It's like from an adventure book, an old adventure book. And so I got that paper route, and little did I know what I was getting into, because every morning at 5 o'clock, I'd wake up, I'd get on my rusty old bike, and I'd put this big bag on my chest, and there was 30 papers in front and 30 papers in back. And I'd hop on that bike and I'd start delivering papers every morning before school. And as I was going down the street, I realized, it's a job. And after a few months, I started getting a little bit better at it. First, I was wobbling all over the place because these papers threw you off balance. But eventually, I started getting the hang of things, and I got to at one point where I could do my entire route without touching the handlebars of my bike. I'd go down the street and take a paper in this hand and throw it, and take a paper in this hand and throw it. And I was just the coolest kid ever, because I could ride down the street and deliver all of my papers without even touching the handlebars. And it was such an adventure, dealing with the dogs that just hated the paper boy, having to cross bridges and things, everything that you had to deal with in a small town, grumpy customers and every once in a while throwing the paper a little bit too far. And every once in a while I ended up with one on the roof or in a bush, and you had to go and knock on the door and say sorry. But it was a wonderful growing experience for me. But of course, this just sparked my fire, and I just wanted job after job after that. And so moving on from paper routes, I started looking around for more jobs, and realized that in a small town there just wasn't much to do. I could work at the little pizza place or the dairy freeze, but that just wasn't my thing. And finally I decided, in a small town like this, there's plenty of yard work to be done. And so I started my little landscaping company. I started with mowing just a few neighbors' lawns. My neighbor had a full acre of just plain grass. And so it was this massive lawn that I would mow every week. And then slowly my clientele grew until the point where I was making pretty good for myself. Started putting in sprinkler systems, taught myself how to do sprinkler systems with my dad as we had done remodeling on our house. And then I took everything that I'd learned there and I'd started doing it for other things. And I painted, I mowed, I planted, I pruned trees and everything. Eventually, I ended up making enough money that I paid for my mission. And then my brothers took over the company when I left, and they paid for their missions with it. And it was a profitable little business there in that small town of Parowan, Utah. So when I was a kid, I probably mowed more lawns than I ever cared to. But when you're mowing lawns and you're out in nature all day, you find some pretty interesting things. Not only did I have probably the best talent out of any kid in school, but I was driving around, I'd always find things in the grass. There was little souvenirs. I had a whole box full of souvenirs, of coins, of buttons and things like that. But I remember there was this one time in specific that I was just scared witless, because I was on this great big rider mower, and I was mowing my neighbor's lawn, and he had the entire acre was grass, but in this grass was an apple orchard. Now this is one of the oldest apple orchards in southern Utah. So most of these trees are 100, 150 years old. So these are old, gnarled apple trees. Half of the stumps are hollow, and And it was early in spring, and I was riding along in this mower, and of course going way too fast because I was a kid, and you got to go fast. Just cars go fast, lawn mowers go fast, the whole shindig. And so I was mowing along, and I ducked under a branch to get underneath it, and then I brought my head back up and slammed on the brakes, because right in front of me, this big, was this massive wasp nest. And my face was probably 6 inches from this wasp nest, and I start hearing this hum grow louder and louder, and I'm sitting there with my face right in this wasp nest, and so I slowly try to back myself up and get out of this this situation, and as I back up, the lawnmower starts making more noise as I'm moving, and the humming gets louder and louder, and finally I just thought to myself, we got to get out of here. And so I full speed ahead, just blasted through, ducked, and went straight on through the rest of the tree, and got out, and there was wasps everywhere. They're just swarming, and of course I ran into the house, grabbed the hose, and I was spraying wasps, and got stung and bitten several times, and then from that point on, I started carrying with me, whenever I went out to mow a lawn, I carried a big can of wasp spray, and wherever I went, because I just did not like wasps anymore, because they're just terrible creatures, unforgiving creatures. In fact, there was this one time I was mowing a lawn, and there was this decorative old tire that they used to decorate. It was some pretty thing that they used in their landscaping, and it had fallen over. And so I jumped off the mower and lifted it up, and as I stuck my hand underneath the tire, apparently I had stuck my hand right up into a wasp nest that had been built there. And so, of course, I pulled out my hand, and my hand was just completely swollen because I had been stung and bitten like 20 times. And so I had this big swollen mass of a hand that I had to take care of. But there's just so many adventures as a kid when you're mowing lawns and doing those things. Growing up in a town like Parowan is always an interesting experience. Parowan is an old pioneer town. It was one of the first towns in southern Utah. In fact, they call it the mother town, because as soon as the pioneers settled in Salt Lake City, they then send a contingent down to Parowan, Utah. And then from Parowan, it became the hub of expanding outwards. Saints from Parowan then went to Las Vegas, to St. George, to Arizona, and all over the place. And so it was the mother town of southern Utah and the southern settlements, Mormon settlements of the time. And so, living in Parowan, you had the old rock church, which was this beautiful church building in the middle of the town center that had been turned into a museum. And then you had the Jesse Knight home and a few other pioneer homes, these adobe homes that were always there. And growing up as a kid, we would take tours and field trips in elementary school, and we'd go to the corners of the old fort, and we'd see all these different things, the old sundial on the corner of Center Street. And it was just a wonderful place to grow up, being able to in your imagination imagine all of these wonderful things that happened here in this old town, this small town. And it was always a good time, but a little bit strange for me the first time in third grade, because in third grade I learned that all the third graders performed a dance for the town, and it was a square dance. And so the third graders for 3 or 4 months beforehand, every day they'd get together and they'd partner up and they would do a square dance for the rest of the community. And so I learned how to basket weave and do-si-do and all of these wonderful things. And then each year after that, you had a different dance. So you had a line dance and different country dances and things like that, until ultimately in your senior year of high school you did the swing. And it was always an adventure being able to participate in this incredible event, this celebration of history, because everybody was in the spirit of it. Everybody was in their pioneer get-up. As kids, we dress up in our cowboy boots and our cowboy hats, and we'd go out and we'd just have fun on this massive celebration. Of course, how Parowan's birthday ended every year is all of the high school students and all of the elementary school students would line up and throughout the halls of the high school, and then back into the gymnasium. And the seniors would be paired up with the kindergartners, and they'd hold hands and they'd march along, and then the juniors and the first graders and so on, they'd hold hands and they'd be marching along, and then they'd come around and they'd join again till the entirety of all of the elementary school and all of the high school and a few of the key leaders of the city were holding hands in this massive march, and that filled the entire gymnasium. So the entirety of the youth of Parowan, Utah were on the floor holding hands, and then we'd sing the Parowan song, and it was just a magical experience, something that you don't get anywhere else. And so Parowan's birthday was always something that you looked forward to every January 13th. So another thing that we were able to do in Parowan that you probably wouldn't be able to do anywhere else was every Thanksgiving time, the last day of school before we got out for the Thanksgiving break, we would have a huge feast. And so everybody in the community was invited, and the high school would host this feast. And so, of course, each grade had a table, and so we decorate the entire table in our theme, and we had all sorts of different themes. You had the pioneer theme, you had the 50s theme, and superhero-themed Thanksgiving tables and all of these different things. And then we'd bring mashed potatoes and stuffing and all of those things. And then the shop teacher every year would buy like 20 turkeys. And he had this great big pit, and he'd pit roast all of these turkeys for the community. And then the afternoon of that last day of school, we'd sit down and we'd be right across from key members of the community, the mayor and the priest of this church and local veterans and all of these different things, and we'd sit down and we had a Thanksgiving feast with these people brushing elbows as high school students with these key members of the community. It was an incredible experience, and everybody sitting there together and a great big Thanksgiving feast, just happy to be together as a community. So growing up in Parowan also offered for many different opportunities to serve. One of the main ones was I was heavily involved in Scouts, and it came time for my Eagle project, and so I began looking for a project, and I ended up talking to the city manager and asking him if he knew of any projects that I could work on. And he had an idea that I thought was pretty cool. As I mentioned before, Parowan's full of old buildings, old pioneer buildings. And one of these buildings was there on the center drag of Parowan, and it was the old visitor center. So it had the visitor center in the basement, and then up on the second floor was where the Lions Club met. And this building was falling apart a little bit, and so I was asked to restore this building. And so for my Eagle project, with wire brushes, we scraped down all the paint off the bricks. We repainted it, and we refinished the window sills and updated some of the wiring and stuff like that. of this old building, restoring this building. And while we were doing it, the historical society would come by and make sure that we were still, keeping the historical integrity of the building. But as well, we heard all of these incredible stories about the different people that had visited Parowan, the dignitaries, and all of the cool things that had happened in this little town that we were growing up in as we restored this building. So being in a household full of boys, there was always certain things expected of us. And one of those things each and every winter was we were expected to shovel the yard. And so in Parowan, we're down in southern Utah, so we get quite a bit of snow. And, you'd wake up some mornings to 8 inches of snow, and it wasn't unheard of. So you got all bundled up, and you went out, and you shoveled the walkway, you shoveled off Dad's car, and you shoveled off the path for the trash can to get out. And one day, I made the mistake of going down the street, and there was this elderly couple, and so I went and I shoveled off their walk and their walkway, and this slowly grew, and I would do this each time, and then eventually there was another little old lady down the street that we'd shovel and walk for, and it just kept growing, more and more that we'd shovel walk. And it got to the point where one morning I remember we did 23 houses shoveling snow. And it would take 2 to 3 hours to do all of these walkways and driveways for my brothers and I. But it was a rewarding experience because all of these little ladies or these elderly couples would be so grateful. They'd come out and they'd ooh and ah, and they'd talk about how wonderful we were, and of course that made us blush, and that's not what we were doing it for. We were just doing it to be nice. So ultimately it became our goal to do it without ever being seen. And so we started wearing ski masks, waking up at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and then we'd go out and we'd try and shovel these snow before anybody woke up, and we were wearing our masks and everything. We weren't fooling anybody. Everybody knew it was us, but in our own imaginations, we thought we were being really sneaky and cool. But even to this day, I still get letters from some of those little ladies that I shoveled their walks all throughout my mission. I'd get some birthday cards and Christmas cards from these little ladies, and they would just be so grateful. And so one of the most wonderful things I think I learned in my childhood was this service. The service is so wonderful, and there's so much that can come from it. And that was something that was planted in my testimony, in my heart, early on as a young age and growing up in Parowan. So the time had finally come. I was old enough, and it was time for me to go on my mission. And this was before the age change, and so I was sitting there, and I filled out my papers. I was still a senior in high school, and I filled out my papers, got everything set up, and met with my bishop, who was my dad at the time, and then the stake president, and we sent in my mission papers. And I remember those 10 days that I was waiting for my call to come back were the longest days. Every day I checked the post. Even though, even day 3, I was checking the post. Even though I knew there was no chance it would be there, I just had to check anyways. But so there, I was so excited waiting for this call, and I remember my mom, she texted me one day while I was sitting in history class, and I stood right up and I said, "I'm out of here. I'm opening my call." And the entire class cheered and walked out. Only something that could happen in a small town in southern Utah. But I walked right out of class and went right home to pick up my call. And so I sat down, and in my family, opening up your mission call was a family affair. But of course, that's pretty big in and of itself when you have nine kids, and half of them are married with grandkids, with nieces and nephews and things like that. And so I got home and I was holding the call. But of course, I had to wait for my dad to get home from work and all of those things. And so I just sat there staring at that big white envelope, so excited. And of course, everybody was making guesses at where I was going. And for me, it was always just a no-brainer to go on a mission. It was something they did, and I had developed a testimony at a young age, and I just knew it was the right thing to do. And I had wonderful example. My father went to Australia. My oldest brother went to Guatemala. I had brothers in Peru, in France. My sister went to Georgia, and all of these wonderful exotic places. And my brother-in-laws were Argentina, and my friends were getting calls to Brazil, to Africa, and all of these places. And to be honest, it never crossed my mind that I wasn't going somewhere foreign and exotic. And so when I finally opened that call, ripped it off, and slowly slid that piece of paper out of the envelope and read, "Elder Ruesch, you have been hereby called to serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the Nevada Reno Mission." All of those excited butterflies up in my chest just went thump. They died right there and just landed in the bottom of my stomach. And it was hard. It was hard to stomach the fact that I wasn't going to this exciting, crazy foreign mission like the rest of my brothers had. And I think it probably showed on my face when I opened that call, because my parents then immediately started trying to get excited. I mean, I tried to put a smile on my face. I was excited about it, and I was still going on a mission. That was what was important, but I think it showed on my face, and so my parents, they started doing some research, and we got online, and my dad searched the Nevada Reno Mission, and my dad said, "Wait, there's something wrong here." And he called me into the room, and they said, "Are you pulling some kind of practical joke on us?" I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I just Googled the Nevada Reno Mission, and there's no such thing." What? So eventually, after a little bit more searching, we found a Deseret News article announcing brand new missions. And we found out that the Nevada Reno mission was to be a brand new mission coming that summer, and that I would be one of the first missionaries in that mission. And so that was, of course, a little bit more exciting, and slowly I started getting more and more excited, and it was such a wonderful thing. But beyond even just that, I remember in sacrament meeting that Sunday, I was invited up by the bishop to bear my testimony and to tell everybody where I went, and I bore my testimony, and I said, and I've received my mission call, and I've been called to the Nevada Reno Mission. And I smiled, and some of the people down in the congregation, they laughed. They thought I was joking. Apparently everybody thought I was joking when I said Nevada Reno Mission. But when I sat there still smiling and not saying anything else, they realized, oh, he's serious. And so that was a little bit hard, but it's something that I would learn to grow a testimony of how important that was for me to be there. One of the hardest things for me was that when I received my mission call, it told me that I had to wait 5.5 months to wait to go into the MTC. Now this is hard because I was having friends that were receiving calls 2 to 3 months after I was, and they were going to the MTC before I was. So there I was sitting, I had my call longer than anybody else, and I was still waiting while I watched them pack up and go off to the MTC, and It was a little bit hard. But one day during that summer while I was waiting, I started getting really bad headaches. And it started as a headache, and then it was sensitivity to light, then lightheadedness. And over the course of this week, it just got worse and worse and worse. And then I remember I was laying in bed one night, and I felt this intense tingling sensation. You know the tingling sensation you have when your foot falls asleep? Well, that tingling sensation was going through waves throughout my entire body. And it was weird and intense. And I remember pulling myself out of bed and walking into my parents' room and just feeling so sick, and everything was spinning. And I remember my dad waking up and immediately asking, "What's wrong?" And I said, I don't feel so well. And I remember my dad immediately getting up and coming over, and he picked me up like it was nothing. Now, my dad is not a small man, but he's 5'10". Of course, I was 6'2" and 170 pounds at the time. So it amazed me that he could just pick me up just like that. And he took me into the front room, and they started taking my vitals. And my dad had spent years as an EMT, so he knew how to do all of this stuff. And my pulse was at like 120. I was running a fever, and it was nasty. And so I remember my dad pulling out the oil, and he gave me a blessing. And I don't even remember the end of the blessing, because as soon as he laid his hand on my head, I felt this intense calm come over me, and I fell asleep. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but that wasn't the miracle of the situation. The next morning, I woke up, and they immediately took me to the hospital, and we sat there in an appointment, and the doctor said, "Yeah, there's definitely something wrong," and he suspected meningitis or something like that, because my symptoms were really bad. But he did tests, meningitis, strep, took blood. They took so much blood that I don't know what kind of test they could have done with all that blood. But ultimately they couldn't figure out what it was, and so they ended up giving me a double shot of penicillin, one in each cheek, of my rump, and sent me home. And I got home and got sicker and sicker, or more sick and more sick. And I remember eventually got to the point where my throat started shutting off, and then the gums around the back of my teeth, that my gums started to swell, and they had swollen over the top of my teeth. I was just in bad shape. I remember one point laying on the couch, my hand was laying across my chest, and I remember looking down and realizing I didn't have enough strength to lift my own hand off of my chest. It was scary. There was definitely a point where I thought that this could be the end. But I knew that this wasn't the time. I had a mission call. I was supposed to go on a mission. And so I remember the night that I thought it was the worst. My dad came in and he gave me a blessing, blessed me with full recovery, and my mom and him sat with me throughout the night, and in the morning, the fever broke. And I continued to take all of the medications. I was on so many medications and drugs, it was ridiculous. But within the week, I was back to myself. I was healed. And so I have a complete testimony of the power of healing, of priesthood power, but not only that, of divine callings, that the Lord has called me to the Nevada Reno mission, and so help me, I was going, because that's where I knew the Lord needed me at that time. And so though 5.5 months seemed forever long, I was in bed for a month and a half of that. And it was a testimony building experience. I learned the Lord had his plan for me, and he understood what I needed and when I needed to be there. And it was such a blessing in my life to understand the Lord's timing and to understand his need and role for me. So eventually the time came, and it was time for me to go, and I was so excited. And I remember getting to the MTC, and there was incredible things that happened in the MTC. For one, the age change was announced while I was in the MTC. To this day, I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember that President Monson making that announcement, and just the absolute hush that covered the entire MTC. Thousands of missionaries sitting there, and it went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop for 1, 2, 3, and then everybody drew in breath at the same time, and it was just an absolute explosion in the MTC. I remember that the mission president for the MTC actually had to stand up, and he had to say, "Elders and sisters, you have to calm down." And he got us all calmed down just in time for President Monson to make the second half of this announcement. For sister missionaries could now serve at 19. And again, there was absolute silence. But this time it was only for about 1 second, because then there was a sister missionary, I remember sitting up in the front to my right, that just let out this shrill squeal, just "Ee!" and everybody erupted. And for the rest of that session, I don't think anybody got anything out of it, because we were so excited about what was happening. We knew that we were going to be the missionaries, going to be leading out this massive wave of missionaries that was going to bring the gospel to the four corners of the earth. And eventually my time in the MTC was over, and I went to the best mission on earth, Nevada, Reno. And I quickly learned that to be proud of where I had been called, because CTR, called to Reno, that's what it was all about. And there was so many wonderful experiences there. I started out with a companion from Denmark. He spoke a little bit of English, but he'd only been out for 6 weeks, because as I mentioned, it was a brand new mission. And so a 6-week missionary was training a brand new missionary, and so it was the blind leading the blind. But we eventually figured it out, and there were so many miracles waiting for us in Nevada. Now, every missionary has their own crazy stories, but being in Nevada, there was so many crazy things that happened to missionaries. And one of them in particular for me as a missionary that is always just a fun story is about halfway through my mission, I was called to serve in a singles ward. And so I was serving on the University of Nevada, Reno, UNR, and working with the singles there at the university. And one evening, my companion and I, we didn't have anything to do, so we went downtown Reno and we started street contacting. And so we started talking to these people and trying to find leads and investigators for our area. But of course, as missionaries, we weren't listening to the news and weren't up on current events. And we had no clue that that weekend was Street Vibrations. Now, if you're not familiar with Street Vibrations is one of the biggest motorcycle rallies in the United States. And so you had the Hells Angels and all of these big biker gangs and things like that filling the streets of downtown Reno. So my companion and I are walking along and with our name tags on, Elder Ruesch and Elder Mapu, and we were walking down the streets, and we started getting some weird looks. There was a lot of leather-clad people, and started getting some Hail Satans and things like that. And didn't take us too long to realize, Elder, we shouldn't be here. And we both agreed, and so we hightailed it out there. So we took a side street and to get out of there as soon as possible. And as we start running down the side street, there's this massive tent, and we thought, it was just some exciting thing, a show or something like that. And as we're running through, my companion looks up and goes white in the face, and he's Polynesian, so that's quite an accomplishment. And I looked to see what's happening. He'd stopped, and there we are standing in front of this open-faced tent, and it's a go-go bar, a strip club. And there we are as two missionaries standing in a strip club. And all our minds thought was, run. And so at full breakneck speed, we ran out of that bar, that tent, and we just kept running. And we ran for 5 or 6 blocks before we finally stopped. Because we could imagine the headlines now. Missionaries found in strip club. And so that was just the way Nevada was. And, you'd be walking down the street and you'd meet a lady of the night. But there were so many people that were ready to hear the gospel. And so though you had fun stories, amongst all of the sin and the crazy things that happened in Nevada, there was people that were prepared. I have a full testimony that people were prepared for me on my mission. I remember it was my second night in the mission field. I was brand new. My companion told me, well, we have a lesson this evening with a new investigator, and she's very argumentative. He said, we've been trying to meet with her for months now, and finally she's agreed to a lesson. But we've been given strict rules to be very careful about what we say, because she's going to argue with everything that we say. That she's going to bring up polygamy. She's going to bring up all of these things that she's just going to tear us apart. And so my companion and I, both brand new missionaries, scared out of our mind. And I remember showing up to this house. It was a part-member family. The husband was a member, and he had married a non-member. And we sat down, and our ward mission leader was there with us. We sat down, and we started to teach this lesson. Again, I was only out 2 days. And so my companion started off and started teaching about the restoration of the gospel, and then he turned it over to me, and I took the next little bit of the lesson and bore my testimony. And I remember at one point opening up the scriptures to read a scripture to her. It was James 1:5, and I opened up the scriptures and I flipped the pages, and I looked down my hand, and it was shaking like a leaf. It was just, I couldn't stop. And my voice was shaking. I was just so scared. But we continued on, and we bore testimony of Joseph Smith, and then of the Book of Mormon. And then my companion had told me that as a new missionary, he wanted me to extend the commitment to read the Book of Mormon. And so in my trembling voice, I committed her to reading the Book of Mormon. And she looked at me, said, "Again?" and I never had that reaction. I never had any reaction at that. And so I'm sitting there, what do you mean again? She says, "I've already read the Book of Mormon." And so I said, well, yeah, go read it again. And then we bore testimony of the Book of Mormon, and we ended the lesson with a prayer, and we left. Several months later, at this woman's baptism, she came up to me and she told me that, elders, the first night that you came, I remember that I had everything prepared to tear you guys apart. I was going to take you. We were going to be talking about polygamy, about everything, all the church doctrine that didn't make any sense. But she said, when I was just about to start doing that, I saw how bad your hands were shaking. I saw how scared you were, and I knew I just couldn't do it. I couldn't tear you apart on this. She said, and that softening is what made it so I could feel the Spirit and felt the testimony of the Book of Mormon. And that's why I'm here today getting baptized. And for me, that was such a testimony, Bill, that my own faults, my weaknesses, is what made that possible. And miracles followed everywhere from out that. My next area, I was double transferred in, so we were two missionaries that had never been in the area. We had no area book. We didn't even have a ward directory, so we didn't even know our ward boundaries. And so we did the only thing we could do. We started knocking on doors. And I remember the first door we knocked on the door, and the high priest group leader answered the door. And so we were able to sit down with him, and we got a gist of the ward, and we knocked 2 or 3 more houses, and then the fourth house that we knocked on was the Elders Quorum president. And so we got to sit down with him, and we talked with him. And then the very next house that we knocked on, there was an elderly gentleman that came to the door, and I was taking the lead on that door, and I said, "Good afternoon. My name is Elder Ruesch. I'm a representative of Jesus Christ, and we have a message for you." And this man, just with the saddest voice, said, "Not now. My wife's just passed away. I can't do this now." And I could feel the seriousness of the situation. And with all my heart, I said, "Then we really do have the message for you. We have a message about how families can be eternal." And he paused for a moment, and he said, "Come back this time next week and we'll talk." We were able to come back and share the plan of salvation and share with them about the temple and about the priesthood power that had been restored. And eventually he was able to share in the joy of the gospel as he was baptized and began working towards going to the temple. And there's so many of these. On campus we met a young Jewish girl that just had questions because her friend was getting married in the temple. And so we were able to teach her and teach her about Christ, something that she'd never been exposed to. Or the last few weeks of my mission was contacting down the street and ran into this man washing his car, and a woman came out to save her husband because he was being attacked by the missionaries, and we started talking to her, and she started talking about her family, and so we shared the family proclamation to the world with her, and within a few weeks, her and her entire family were being baptized. And the miracles that happened on my mission, I knew without a doubt that was where I was called to serve for a reason, because there was people that I was meant to share the gospel with, to fill their life with that light. My mission taught me so many things, but most of all, it solidified my testimony of the Church of Jesus Christ, that our Savior really does know us, that he has made that sacrifice for us. The 2 years I had to serve as his representative were incredible. But I know that even now, even though I don't wear the tag, I still bear his name and bear witness of his atoning sacrifice. I know that the priesthood power has been restored, and it's that knowledge that gives me so much strength and makes me so grateful to be able to share this gospel every day. And I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because I know the joy and happiness it can bring in people's life, and the strength that it gives to individuals. So when I was in middle school, I remember in 7th grade, I wrote a paper, and in this paper, I had received an award because of my descriptive writing or something like that. And because I had received this reward, I was asked to share this paper in front of the class. And I remember getting up in front of the class and holding that paper in front of me, and I was shaking so bad that I couldn't even read the paper. And ultimately, I ended up having to sit down without having read the paper because I was so scared. Stage fright petrified me, paralyzed me. And this was something that had always been a struggle for me. And what happened is that ultimately, my mom's best friend just happened to be the theater director for the high school. And she tricked me one day into auditioning for the high school musical. I was completely unaware of this, but when the cast list came out, she sent me a message, and she had cast me in the play. And, of course, I hem and hawed, but my mom said, nope, you're doing it. And so, of course, I ended up doing it. And I remember playing that show, even though I had only like 2 words in the entire show. I remember it felt so good. I enjoyed conquering that fear and getting past it. And so this is when began my love of theater and performance. For the next several years, I continued in my theater experiences. I'd be extras in the musical, and I would do a play here and there. And eventually, in my sophomore year of high school, I auditioned, and I was cast in a lead role. It was My Fair Lady, and I was cast as Freddie. Now, if you're not familiar with the story, Freddie is a rich upperclassman that falls in love with Eliza Doolittle, who is this street urchin that's being taught how to be proper and speak properly. And I fall in love with her, and for the rest of the show, I spend walking in front of that house where she lives. And he sings the song On the Street Where You Live, which is a beautiful tenor song and just one of the most iconic love songs in musical history. And as a sophomore, it was my job to sing the song. And I remember on opening night, I was scared stiff. My palms were sweating. I was nervous. I had full gray tuxedo and everything, and there was just sweat dripping down my face and my top hat. And I went out on the stage, and I began to sing, and just with all my heart singing and praying with all my might that I was going to hit these notes, I was going to stay on key, stay on time, whatever it may be. And I remember hitting that last note with every ounce of my being, throwing my arms out full and holding out that last note, which was this big, high tenor note, and just sitting there, and then the lights went out. And I remember the sound of the audience applauding for that first time. And it was breathtaking. It was amazing. But of course, I was still absolutely petrified, frozen in this position. In fact, the entire scene change had happened behind me while I was still frozen. Finally, one of the stagehands walked up and said, "What are you doing? Get off stage." And that snapped me back into my senses, and I ran off stage. But this grew the love for me even more. I had conquered my fear. I had done something difficult. I had done something hard. I had. The audience told me that I was good, that I was enough, and it was such an incredible feeling. So my junior year, I had done lots of acting and other stage-related things, but in my junior year, my theater director for the high school, she got a message from the state stating that this year for competition, they wanted to experiment with having student-directed shows. And so I was asked if I would direct the show. And I was ecstatic about this. This was an incredible opportunity, so of course I said yes. And so I looked through shows, and I finally found one. You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, which is a musical about the comic strip. It's the Peanuts. And so I got the script, I held auditions, and I cast this crew. And it was a blast. We had so much fun working on this crew. And in fact, Charlie, the young man I chose to play Charlie Brown, was actually a stage manager. Had never been on stage before, but he just fit Charlie Brown so much. The shy and the timid character of Charlie Brown. But as we were going along, it was the week before competition, and I received a call, and my Sally was dropping out of the production. She couldn't do it anymore. And so there I was with a project I had been working for months on, and my lead actress was gone. And so we scrambled, and we eventually found a freshman who had auditioned for the part that could fill in. And luckily, she was very familiar with the musical, so already had all the lines and the music memorized. And so we spent day in and day out working on this musical and teaching her the choreography and teaching her the music and everything. And as ready as I thought my cast was, I don't think that they were near as ready as they would have been if it hadn't been for this, because they pulled together and they united for this performance, because they had to work together to make sure that it was a success, because they had to train this new actress. And I remember going to the competition, and we get on stage, and there's an hour time limit for one acts, and we start acting, and they're doing incredible. But of course it's taking a little bit longer because this new actress, she's not completely in sync with everything yet. So it's taking a few seconds here, a minute there, whatever it may be. And I remember I'm sitting backstage with my timer, and we're running 57 minutes, 58 minutes, 59 minutes. And finally we get to the last scene, and all the actors are off before they go out for their final song. And I say, cut the curtain call, sing the last song, and then run off stage. And so they finish that last note, and we grab all of the sets and we throw it off stage, and they call time. 59:58. We had made it by 2 seconds. Anyways, in that region competition, we took first place, and then we ultimately took the show on to state and won the state competition with it as well. And it was such a wonderful experience to work with a cast and crew like that. But the thing that shaped me the most with Your Good Man, Charlie Brown is after we took it to the state competition, we decided that we were going to take Your Good Man, Charlie Brown and perform it for the community. But we wanted to do something special with it, and we decided that we would perform it as a cancer benefit, that all the proceeds would go to local cancer victims. One in particular was a young woman, 4 or 5 years old, in the community that had been diagnosed with leukemia. And of course, that's absolutely devastating for a community, for a family. And so we decided that we were going to do this for her. And we performed the show for a week, and I remember on closing night, this little girl, her blood count was high enough that she was able to attend the show and watch Charlie Brown. And she just loved it. She enjoyed it so much, this little 5-year-old, watching all these cartoon characters run around on stage. And at the end, we were able to take pictures with her, and she took pictures with Snoopy and with Charlie Brown. And while they were taking pictures, her mother came up to me, and she pulled me aside and said, "You know, the money that you guys gave us, I can never thank you enough for. But more than anything, tonight you've given me the greatest gift." She said, "Tonight, for the first time in 5 months, I saw my little girl smile. And that's something that I can never repay you for." For me, this changed my life. I realized the things that I said, the things that I performed on that stage were life-changing. Made people feel things that they didn't even know they were capable of feeling. They could connect with the story, that it could change lives. And for me, that was the power of theater, being able to bring the smile to a little girl's face. So being involved in all of these theater things eventually led me to my senior year competing for the Sterling Scholar Competition. In Utah, what that is each school selects a student in categories in math and science and theater to represent them in a statewide competition. And so you created a portfolio, a binder with all of your experiences, and then you had an interview process. You went in, you were interviewed by the judges, and in my case, in theater, you also had to sample a monologue and share that. And I competed in this Sterling Scholar competition, and I shared all of the wonderful things I had done in theater, and you know, I thought that, you know, I did okay, but some of these guys are from performing arts schools, and theater is their everyday life. That's what they did every day. So there was no chance I was going to win, but it was a good resume builder, and it was a good experience to be able to share these talents. But I remember that evening at the ceremony, we were sitting there, and we were all lined up, and they had everybody in all the categories come onto the stage. And so there was like 20 of us lined up across the stage in each category. And then they would begin to list off the runners-up and then the winner. So I was standing there on stage, and we were in this big conference center, and the audience is full of parents and teachers and all of these things. And I remember them reading off the runners-up and all of those things. And then they started reading the life bio of the winner. I remember this young man was born in Arizona, moved to Utah, and does it. And I thought to myself, that's really interesting. This guy has a lot of similarities with me. And the farther that they got, I realized, wait, I won? It hadn't even occurred to me that it was a possibility. And so I stood up there on stage, and I just absolutely dumbfounded. I had no idea, and a smile from ear to ear came on. I had won the Sterling Scholar competition, and with this came scholarships and awards that would help me get into college and all sorts of things to help me with my future career. It was such a wonderful experience that the talent that I had developed throughout high school was paying off, and I was being recognized for that. Because of Sterling Scholar and my other experience, I ultimately decided that theater was something that I wanted to go into. I wanted to expand my skills. And so I started auditioning for scholarships. And so I auditioned for schools in Utah, Utah University, Utah State, BYU, UVU, several in California. And I started hearing back from a lot of them, and I was having a lot of success. I was even invited to audition for Juilliard. And it was an incredible experience, meeting with these directors and auditioning, and then having them offer money to me to come and act. I had never even thought about acting for money before. It was just I loved theater, and that's what I did. And so it was exciting to see this. Part of me wondered whether some of these scholarships were just because I was a 6'2" tall, decently good-looking man. Because most of these auditions, I'd walk in and there was row after row of pretty young lady, and I would be the only guy there. But you know, I'll take what I can get, and it was a wonderful experience auditioning for these schools, and getting all of these offers and all of these options to look at for college. So when I was applying for schools and auditioning, it hadn't really ever crossed my mind to apply for BYU, because nobody in my family had ever been. In fact, I know actually my grandparents had been, but they were the only ones since then. And all my brothers and sisters had applied, but hadn't got in. And so I thought, you know, there's no chance that I'm getting in, because they had better test scores than I did, better grades. And I just thought, you know, there's no chance. But my dad, he was teasing me one day and said, yeah, there's no way you're getting into BYU. The Ruesches have all tried, and they never get in. And this is the way my dad was. He was always teasing us about different things. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to prove him wrong. And so I put in an application, and much to my surprise, I got in. And this ended up being a major blessing. Because as I mentioned before, when I received my mission call, I waited 5.5 months. On my mission papers, I said, I really need to leave before September. And I was called to leave on September 19th. Now, what this did is all of my scholarships that I received to any other school, they would allow me to postpone those scholarships for 2 years for my mission. But because I wasn't leaving until September 19th, it was after the semester started. So I would have to postpone for 2.5 years, which was a no-go. And so I lost my scholarships to a lot of schools. And ultimately, what it came down to when I got home from my mission was that BYU kept my scholarship, and I just felt strongly that that's where I needed to be. And so I came to BYU Theater, and I've had wonderful opportunities, everything from playing the villain and a goat in Princess Academy to doing young company theater at Water Sings Blue and elementary schools across the state, or recently doing Chariots of Fire. It's been an incredible opportunity to act and expand my skill and just have an incredible time. Most of all, BYU's taught me so many more things I can do with theater. I can share and present in the best manner possible so many wonderful things, and it's led me to what I want to do with the rest of my life in training and in public speaking and in sharing my story. So when I came to BYU, I was a semester behind all the other freshmen. I started in winter semester, so they were a semester ahead, so I hit the ground running. I had to really get started. And I knew from the very beginning that I would be working through college to help pay for those bills. I didn't want to take out student loans. And besides, growing up, I'd always worked. I'd always mowed lawns, delivered papers, worked on the farm, whatever it was. And so it was just a no-brainer that that'd be something I'd do. And so my first day walking into the HVAC, I saw on the door a sign that said, "Early morning custodial, hiring now." And so, I thought, my class schedule is crazy. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find a job at another time, but waking up early in the morning, I can do that. I can wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and work for 4 hours and have a part-time job while I go to school. And so I started working. I went in to the office and they hired me on the spot. And so the next morning I started working. 4 o'clock in the morning I was there. Not quite as chipper as I thought I'd be, but I started working custodial. It's about 2 weeks into this job when I was walking down the hallway and I saw this young lady. And she was in sweats and had her hair up in a messy bun and wearing glasses. And I mean, it was 6 o'clock in the morning, so she wasn't dressed to impress. She was just at work. And I watched her as she went past me and into the custodial closet. And I just had this weird feeling. It definitely wasn't love at first sight. Nothing miraculous like that, but I had a distinct impression that you need to ask that young lady out. And this took me by surprise because I was seriously dating another young woman, a sister from my mission. I had come home and we'd started dating, and we were pretty serious. In fact, she was thinking about marriage and all of these things, and this was weird. You can't be taking other girls out on dates when you're dating someone else, and so it just didn't work in my mind. So that night I went home and I dumped her and said that we should see other people, and it's not you, it's me, all of those things. And the next morning I was ready and flaring. I received the impression I was going to do it, and I remember walking down the hall to ask this young woman out on a date. And as I was walking, I overheard her talking with one of her friends, talking about her brand new boyfriend that she had just started dating. And my heart sunk. It was just boom, 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 boom. Ugh. just the most sinking feeling. Because this girl I was planning on asking out on a date, now, well, she was dating someone else, and that's just against the bro code to mess with all of that. And so I chickened out and just watched from afar, and it was so hard for me to just sit there and not be able to do anything about this impression that I received. So I chickened out, and I continued to chicken out. 5 months it took me to work up the courage. And so, I mean, during these 5 months, I did introduce myself. I found out her name was Shay, and I had talked to her a little bit, but nothing much more than just a hi in the hallway. And in fact, I wanted more. I always tried to start up some small talk, but, you know, guy trying to talk to a girl, it wasn't going too well. Till eventually one morning, I just decided to try a different tactic. And she was cleaning this big glass door, and she was just finishing one side, and she was going to switch to the other side. And so I just stuck out my foot, just enough to block the door. So as she pushed it to open it, she slammed right into the door. That left her nose print and everything on the door. And it was a terribly mean thing, terribly mean. But, you know, and this began a whole new thing where I teased her. I would tug on her vacuum cord or whatever things, and when I teased her, she would talk to me. And so I did whatever I could to make sure I was walking down her hallway, that I'd be able to tease her a little bit, and then we got to talk for a few minutes. And so this friendship slowly started to grow. But it was just at work. We'd just talk for a little bit, and then we'd move on. And finally decided, okay, it's time to kick this into high gear. But once again, during that 5-month period of me checking out, I had started dating another girl, taking her out on a few dates. Things were going really well, but she decided that she needed to go on a mission. And I agreed with her, and I said, you know, a mission, it's life-changing, it's an important thing. I support you completely. And so it was the last day of the semester. I was helping her unload all of her stuff out of her apartment into her car so she could head home. And I was holding this girl's hand, and we were walking back to her apartment. And we were walking through the dorms, and there in the common area, I saw this girl from work. And I received the strongest impression that I've ever received in my entire life. Probably the only time that I've ever heard a voice inside my head telling me something. And that voice said without mistake, "Why aren't you with her?" And I didn't need to be told twice. And so I sent this other girl back home the next day. And then I took action. The next day at work, I started talking to a group of coworkers and said, so I'm putting together a group. We're going to go to the Payson Temple open house, okay? Just a big group of us from work. And she walked in while I was talking about this, and so I kind of said, hey, Shay, you want to come with us? And she said, sure, why not? And so everybody else left, and so I walked up and said, can I get your number to, you know, coordinate times and things like that? And she looked at me and said, it's about time. And this took me off guard because, you know, she had a boyfriend and all that, and I didn't know she was waiting for me to ask for her number. But anyways, I got her number, and the next Saturday, when we had planned, we all loaded up into the car, and of course, it was supposed to be kind of this great big group date. There were supposed to be 4 guys and 4 girls. And, well, all the guys bailed at the last second. And so it was me and 4 girls going to the Payson Temple. And so they all got in my car, and we drove down there. And we went through this open house, and the Payson Temple is absolutely beautiful. The design, and it was incredible. And I was able to walk through with Shay, and she hadn't been through the temple yet. And so at one point I leaned over to her in one of the ceiling rooms, and I said, feel free, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me, and I'll do my best to answer them for you. And she jumped, and she was just, it was a wonderful day. And so afterwards, I took him out, and we went to dinner, and of course, I wanted to be the gentleman and all, and so there we are sitting at Applebee's, and I want to pay for this girl's dinner, so it's a date, right? A sly date. But I can't just pay for one girl's dinner. And so I called the waiter over, and I slipped him my credit card and told him I was paying for the whole table without any of the girls knowing. And that dinner ended up costing me like $140. And when you're only making $8.50 an hour, that's a chunk of change. But I was making an investment, right? So after dinner, I dropped each of the girls off at home, but of course, conveniently, Shay was the last one I dropped off. And so I took her back to the school where she had parked her car, and we sat there next to her car, and we talked for a while, and we talked and talked about life stories, about ambition, and sooner or later, 3 hours had passed, and we'd just been sitting there talking, and I knew it was now or never. So I worked up the courage, and I said, so what would it take for a guy like me to get a girl like you to go on a date with him? And she launched into the lamest friend zone speech that I've ever heard in my entire life. And, I just need a good friend right now, and I just need a guy I can trust, and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm writing a missionary, and my boyfriend, he's on a study abroad in Spain, in Mexico, and all of these things. And finally I just said, well, okay. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Look at it this way. I'm not asking you. I'm telling you I'm taking you out on a date. The boldest thing I'd ever said in my entire life. I don't even know where it came from. Without another word, she got into her car and drove away, without saying another thing. And I'm thinking, oh no, I've blown it. But I'm persistent, so I kept going. I kept contacting her. I kept in touch, and within the week, she was on a date with me. And so began this romance. I remember that there were a lot of late nights. When we first started going out, of course, she had a boyfriend in Mexico and a missionary in the mission field. And so I had some competition. And so I kept it very just friend. And so, we'd go out and we'd do things. And I remember one night in particular, we got back and we had gone out and we'd got a milkshake or something, and we sat in her car and we talked. And I stayed on my side of the car, she stayed on her side of the car, because, I wasn't going to do anything because I didn't want her to feel I was pressuring her or anything like that. And we just talked for hours and hours. And without even knowing it, I looked up at the clock, and it was 4 o'clock in the morning. We had talked through the night. And I had work at 4:30, and so we had talked through the entire night. And I got out of her car and walked to work, and it was the most incredible thing, because I could just talk to her. I could go on and on with this wonderful girl that I'd met. And so that next day, after we'd spent the night talking in the car, she called up her boyfriend in Mexico and broke things off. And this was incredibly exciting to me, because I was her shoulder to cry on, because breakups are hard no matter what. I was her shoulder to cry on. I was there for her, and I thought, this is great. This means that I'm in, I've scored, and it's great. But she had a different idea. She didn't want me to be a rebound or anything like that, and so she just continued to say that she wasn't ready, and I think she was just scared today to return missionary, the commitment that was in that. And so for a week and a half, we were still just friends, and I spent every waking moment with her, spent day in, day out, homework, walks. I spent more money on her in those first 2 weeks, taking her out to dinners, to milkshake, all of those different things. But finally, I convinced her that, that we might consider a little bit more. The difficult thing was that, normally when I took a girl out, third date, maybe a peck on the cheek, a kiss at the end of the date. But I was going on 2 weeks of dating this girl and hadn't even received a first kiss. And so one night I decided, okay, I'm up in my game, so I decided I was cooking her dinner at my place. And so brought her over, and we were making Navajo tacos, and we were making them together. And I remember we were sitting in the kitchen, and she decided that she was going to take matters into her own hands. And so she grabbed me by the apron, and she pulled me up, and had me pressing her against the counter, and pulled me in close and did that whole close talking thing. And I was just, I'm so ready for this first kiss. I'm so ready for this first kiss. And then she pulled away, and she continued on cooking as if nothing had happened. And she continued doing this for a few weeks, just teasing me, just dangling it in front of my face, until it was probably 2.5, 3 weeks into dating. It was one Sunday evening, and we decided we'd go on a walk together. We went to Parowan Park here in Provo, and it's a beautiful river park, and there's this beautiful pond with ducks in it. And we were sitting there, and all the ducks were sitting on the banks, and I remember watching her run through the ducks and watching the ducks scatter, and I just knew this girl was something different. So we were walking down the side of the pond, and we got to the top of the pond. The moon was full, and she pulled me close again and did that close talking thing. And I just knew that she was just teasing me again. And she said, "So what would you do if I kissed you right now?" And I said, "So what would you do if I kissed you right now?" And she said, "Oh, I don't know." And then she kissed me. And again, I wasn't expecting this. So there's fireworks going off in my brains, mine are aneurysms and things like that. And finally, after like 3 seconds, I realized, oh, I better kiss her back. And so I kiss her back. And you got this moonlit pond over the Crystal Lake. It was absolutely picture perfect. And that was our first kiss. So we had been dating for a few weeks, and she came and she went camping with my family. My family loved her, and I knew that this was getting pretty serious, and it was time to start thinking about the future. And so I started ring shopping, and I remember that at work, my supervisor, he noticed that I had started dating one of the girls that was working on shift, and so one day he pulled me aside and said, "So what are your intentions with Shay?" And I blushed and said, "I don't know. I'm looking into the future." And so he made a big deal out of this, and he went into her shift's meeting and says, "So, what do you think this means?" And made this whole big ordeal and just embarrassed Shay to the extreme. So we decided we were going to get our revenge. And so we planned a fake proposal. We took pictures and everything on this fake proposal in the same place that we had our first kiss. And then we brought it into work today, and we fooled everyone, made everybody think that we got engaged, and we'd only been dating for like 2 weeks. And we got everybody so good. They believed it entirely. Only problem is during all of that fake proposal, I really liked the idea. And so the shopping began, and I'm like a classic kind of guy, and so I wanted to pick out the ring myself, and so I talked to her friend, and I had her hack Shay's Pinterest account, and so I had the list of all the wedding things and all the rings that she liked, and ultimately I ended up going with an antique ring. The ring was made in 1915. The diamond was an old mine cut from the mid 1800s, and it was just a gorgeous ring, and I knew it was time to propose. But of course, Shay had a feeling that the time was coming as well, and so I had to throw her off. So I told her that she should come down to southern Utah with me, and we would have an adventure too. And so she came down, and I had planned this elaborate thing. And one of the places that I had landscaped in the past had this beautiful gazebo, and it was lit with lights. And I had my family light candles all the way down this trail to a gazebo, and music playing, and everything was picture perfect, and the stars were out, moon was full. And we get there, we have strawberries and martinellis, and just absolutely perfect. And I pulled a box out of my pocket and opened it up, and it was a necklace, and I played that off, and then I threw her off with a few other things. But the next day was when I was actually going to do it. My dad and I, we created this elaborate story that he needed my help to go and fix an organ at one of the churches in Cedar City. And that then I would have Shay and my mom come in later and meet us for lunch. And my dad and I, we didn't have anything to fix, but we were going, and we went and set up. We got flowers and everything. And there's this old rock church in Cedar City, and it's got this beautiful clock tower. And this clock tower has been there for 150 years, and then before that it was from the old cedar tabernacle before the fire. When it burnt down, they took the clock and then they moved it onto this old rock church. So it's absolutely beautiful, and then there's a balcony in front of this clock tower that overlooks the entire city. And so after lunch, I said, let's go take a tour of that old rock church. It's got some beautiful murals and things like that, and we toured it and all these things, and I got up in front of on the balcony in front of the clock tower, and I waited for the clock to strike. Boom! And then I came out with flowers and her lilies, her favorite, and I went down to one knee and I opened the box and I said something to the effect of, through the corridors of time, little is going to matter, but the one thing I wanted to matter in my life was her. And she said yes. So all of this happened in a complete whirlwind. Started the year dating a different girl, ended the year engaged and getting married to another. And I was happier than could be. We scheduled the temple, and of course the first temple that even though it was near neither of our homes, we decided that we should get married in the Payson Temple, where our first date was. And when we called in to schedule the temple, they asked us which room that we would like to get sealed in, and we talked it over, and we decided that we wanted to get married in the sealing room, where I had bent over and whispered in Shay's ear for the first time that if she had any questions, she could ask me. So the exact same room that we had walked through on our first date. About 5 months later, we were kneeling across the altar, getting married for time and all eternity. And it was so surreal to me. 2 o'clock, room 7, or at 2 o'clock, room 7 in the Payson Temple. What a wonderful thing to be married to the woman of my dreams, and to share the rest of eternity and the rest of my life with her. she's incredible, and every day since then, it's been 2.5 years now. It's been an incredible blessing, and I love her just as much now as I ever could then. And it's something that I can never be grateful enough for is the day that I first saw her and had the feeling that I should ask her out on a date.